皆さん、今日は祇園祭り最後の祭りの日でございますが、それにもかかわらず、ご参集いただきましたこと、感謝いたします。今日はですね、アメリカのミシガン大学の歴史学の先生でいらっしゃいまして、で、ご専門の分野はですね、広くエジプト、イラン、そして南アジア、パキスタン、インド、こういったところをカバーされ、そうした国々の宗教、文化、歴史を研究なされているファン・コール先生でございます。ファン・コール先生に今日は、特にファン先生は9.11以降ですね、イラクのシーア派の問題等を中心にして、時事問題に関して数多く書かれたり、あるいは見解を表明されたりで、またアメリカやイギリスのジャーナリズムの世界において盛んにコメンテーターとしての活躍をなされております。でその先生に今日はイラクの、アメリカの元のイラクのシーア派の中のサドルという人の、これシーア派の中の、皆さんニュースをよく見られている方はこのサドル派という形で日本の新聞にもたびたびしょっちゅう出ておりますけれども、このサドル派の運動について、皆さんにお話、スピーチをなさるということになります。それからですね、今日、お二人、海外からお客さんが、参加されております。一人はアメリカベイルート大学の歴史学のベイルートのアメリカン大学の歴史学の先生でいらっしゃいまして、ちょっと失礼いたします。ヒラール・ハーシャーン先生ヒラール・ハーシャーン先生は、レバノンにおけるヒズボラ、それから、レバノンの政治に関してのご専門家でいらっしゃいます。そしてもう一人、ファーティマ・アル・サーイク先生、アラブ首長国連邦大学 UAE 大学の助教授で、歴史学がご専門でいらっしゃいまして、ご本人は、ドバイ、アラブ首長国連邦のドバイのシーア派のお家のご出身でございます。それでは、ファン先生、よろしくお願いいたします。
Well, thank you very much, Professor Mori, for that very warm introduction, and allow me to thank Doshisha University for, and especially Sizemore for having me speak here. And I'd also like to thank Professor Yamagishi and Meiji University, my other hosts on this trip to Japan. It's a great honor for me to be here and a very auspicious occasion, and I'm very grateful to you all for coming out on this festival day. My topic today is the Sadr movement in contemporary Iraq. And I'd like to begin by situating the Sadr movement in Iraq. This map is very simple. It oversimplifies the situation, but it shows that you have the Shiite Muslims in the south, the Sunni Arab Muslims in the west and center north, and in the far north you have the Kurds. So these are the main ethnic groups in Iraq.
そこで
Well, how would we define the difference between the Sunnis and the Shiites, a difference that has become so important in contemporary Iraq and in the Gulf region more generally?
それ
The Shiite branch of Islam has a special devotion to the family of the Prophet. And the Shiites in Islam are those who felt that the Prophet Muhammad, after his death, should have been succeeded by persons closely related to him. Among the central figures in this drama after the Prophet's death are the Prophet's son-in-law and cousin Ali, his daughter Fatima, and their children, the Prophet's grandsons Hassan and Hussein. The Prophet's grandson, Hussein, mounted a rebellion against the then Islamic Empire in 680 of the Common Era, and was surrounded, cut off, and killed, along with his close family members. And this tragedy, where the grandson of the Prophet was martyred, has become central to the ritual calendar of Shiite Islam. On the 10th of the month of Muharram, Shiites commemorate this tragedy. They mourn with poetry and with stories of the martyr. And some of them, among the folk Shiites, among the common people, will flagellate. They will actually beat themselves with whips or chains, cut themselves with knives. And this is especially true in the older quarters of Iraqi cities. And the shrine of Hussein in the city of Karbala, where he was struck down, has become among the major centers for pilgrimage for the Shiite Muslims. Likewise, Hussein's father, Ali, has a shrine at the Iraqi city of Najaf that is a center for pilgrimage. When the Americans were planning to invade Iraq, a high U.S. official in the Defense Department explained that Iraqis would be better friends for the United States than Saudis, because unlike the Saudis, he said, the Iraqi Shiites were secular, and Iraq didn't have religious shrines. This demonstrates how ignorant the American administration was of the country they were about to conquer. Although the Shiites are perhaps 60% of the Iraqi population, for most of modern Iraqi history, they were excluded from political power. In the first half of the 20th century, you had a British-imposed Sunni monarchy.
まず20世紀
And then later you had Sunni military men or the Sunni-dominated Ba'ath Party come to power. In the 1950s, the secular, socialist, Arab nationalist party, the Ba'ath Party, became very popular in Iraq, as did also the Communist Party. So Shiite clergymen and activists like Mohammed Baqir as-Sadr became alarmed that the young Shiites were deserting their religion and joining these secular mass parties. So he and colleagues founded in 1958 the Dawa Party to work for an Islamic state, an Islamic utopia that would substitute for the Marxist workers' utopia. And in Muhammad Bakr Sadr's view of the Islamic state, the Islamic law would be imposed as the law of the land. There would be an Islamic economy, and there would be a consultative process for choosing the leadership. It's maybe not exactly democratic, but the people would be consulted on their leadership. The Dawa Party became enormously popular among Shiites and even some Sunnis in Iraq in the 1960s and 70s. But in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini made his revolution in Iran, and the Ba'ath Party, led by Saddam Hussein, became alarmed at the possibility that Shiite activists would overthrow the Iraqi government as well. So Saddam banned the Dawa Party. You would be executed if you were known to belong to it after 1980. He rounded up and executed a number of Dawa Party members, and including Muhammad Bakr Sadr. So the Dawa Party was banned, Sadr was killed, and Saddam then invaded Iran and fought an 8-year war with the Iranian Shiite government. The center for Shiite thought in Iraq is the city of Najaf, where the shrine of Ali is, and it is also a seminary city and a place where authoritative religious teaching is given by the top ayatollahs. When Shiite political parties were suppressed and banned, then authority in the community shifted to the clerics in Najaf, to the specifically religious institutions. In 1991, after the Gulf War, when Saddam had tried and failed to occupy Kuwait, the Shiites of Iraq staged a national uprising which was brutally suppressed with the loss of tens of thousands of lives. After the uprising, the religious leadership to the Shiites was supplied by two main figures. One, a more cautious conservative figure, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, an Iranian, and the other, a younger man, Muhammad Sadiq Sadr, who was more radical. It tells you a great deal about the religious leadership in Iraq that this was the younger man. Sadiq Sadr organized the poor Shiites of Sadr City, East Baghdad, what was then just East Baghdad. He reached out to tribal groups, to villages. He provided social services, and he increasingly defied Saddam Hussein, who had him assassinated in February of 1999, along with his two elder sons, so that he was succeeded by his younger son, Muqtada. By the way, the middle picture is of Sadiq Sadr preaching not long before his death in a burial shroud. So this was his announcement, he's ready for martyrdom. to skip this. Let's see. Let me skip that slide. Just to briefly say, the Americans, when they first conquered Iraq, had planned to rule it themselves, like Germany after World War II, and had a plan for ruling it that didn't work out very well. And after the fall of Saddam, Muhammad Sadr's son, Muqtada, emerged and demanded the immediate withdrawal of the U.S., the implementation of an Islamic republic, and he organized demonstrations against American rule. He also formed his own militia, loyal to him, bearing arms, mainly young people in the slums. And he is, mind you, the son of Sadiq Sadr and the the cousin of Muhammad Baqir Sadr. So he is descended from both the previous Sadr figures that had defied Saddam. At first, the Americans didn't know who he was. Then they didn't think he was important. Finally, they thought he's very, very dangerous. By November of 2003, it had become clear to the Americans that they could not rule Iraq directly, and so they decided to give sovereignty to the Iraqis and to hold what they called caucus-based elections so as to install an Iraqi government. That plan was rejected both by Muqtada Sadr and by Sistani, who considered it undemocratic. The Shiites of Iraq reacted to Bremer's plan, which would not have allowed one person, one vote elections, by holding huge demonstrations first in the southern city of Basra and then in Baghdad, the capital. These rallies were supported by the main Shiite leadership, by Sistani, by Muqtada Sadr, and also by another important leader, Abdulaziz al-Hakim. And they did demand one person, one vote, open elections. Faced with a growing guerrilla war by the Sunni Arabs against them, the Americans could not risk alienating the Shiite majority, and so they gave in to these demands for open elections. In this period also, Muqtada Sadr asked his followers to agitate against the American-appointed governors of the Iraqi provinces in the south, to insist that they resign because they had not been democratically elected. I think the American administration became nervous that if they do turn power over to an Iraqi government, that perhaps Sadr and his movement will be very influential in it, and they wanted to forestall that from happening. So in early April of 2004, as the Americans were preparing to hand sovereignty over to an Iraqi government, they suddenly announced that they are going to kill or capture Muqtada as-Sadr. Well, remember that Muqtada had seen his father killed after a similar announcement was made by Saddam Hussein, So he responded to this threat by having his followers launch an uprising throughout southern Iraq. The American generals thought that Muqtada Sadr only had 1,000 fighters. In fact, Muqtada Sadr had literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers, and all Iraqis have guns. So for 2 months, the Sadr movement more or less took over much of Iraq, including Baghdad. After hard fighting, the U.S. military did eventually push the Sadrists back, and ultimately Grand Ayatollah Sistani, the spiritual leader of the Iraqi Shiites, helped to negotiate a truce. In late June, the Americans and the United Nations appointed an Iraqi transitional government to whom they transferred sovereignty on paper and mandated that elections would be held by January of 2005. The interim prime minister was Iyad Alawi, a former member of the Ba'ath Party, who was a secular hardliner, even though from a Shiite background. Because, in part, of Alawi's dislike for the Sadr movement, the Sadrists were attacked again by the Americans in August of 2004, and a major battle ensued. There was massive U.S. bombardment of Najaf. The U.S. and Alawi threatened to storm the shrine of Ali, where Muqtada Sadr was based. And so there was a big crisis. And this was a global crisis because Shiites throughout the world, in Bahrain and Pakistan, felt the Americans were bombing the holy city of Najaf. And I think if the U.S. military had attacked the shrine of Ali, that Iraq would have become extremely unstable right there. In the end, this crisis was resolved by Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who, remember, he was a rival of Muqtada's father and usually chose the path of peace. So Sistani called for a mass civilian march of Shiites on Najaf. And they all came into the city, civilians, hundreds of thousands of them, and it became impossible to fight, and so the fight ended. After that, Muqtada Sadr disappeared from politics for about a year. He was lying low. I'm going to skip through some of this because it's going long. Elections were held in January of 2005, and those elections were dominated by the Shiite religious parties loyal to Grand Ayatollah Sistani. So that for the first time in modern Iraq, the Shiite majority came to power as a politically dominant force. But within the Shiites, the dominant parties were the Dawa Party, founded in part by Muhammad Baqir as-Sadr, and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, led by Abdulaziz al-Hakim. Although a very large number of Shiites in the south were loyal to the Sadr movement of Muqtada Sadr, they were not included in the political party of Sistani. the government that emerged was led by Ibrahim Jaafari, the head of the Dawa Party, and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq came to power in most of the provinces. So the Sadrists had a lot of street power, but they weren't in representative institutions. I think I'm going to skip this. One issue that emerged as the Iraqi parliament crafted the country's new constitution in summer of 2005 was whether Iraq would have a strong central government or whether it would have a weak central government but strong provincial confederacies. The Supreme Council, which had been formed in Tehran in 1982 when the Shiite leadership was exiled to Iran, had come back and become powerful, and they were pushing for a Shiite super province in the south. 8 provinces would all be put together and they would become a kind of Shiite confederation similar to what the Kurds had in the north. And the Sadr movement and the Sunni Arabs were afraid that if this happened, it would break up Iraq. So Al-Hakim became a champion of Shiite nationalism. Sadr was a champion of Iraqi nationalism with a Shiite coloration. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. I have said that. By fall of 2005, the militia of Al-Hakim, the Badr Corps, and the militia of al-Sadr, the Mahdi army, actually fought some battles with each other in the holy city of Najaf. Ultimately, this fight is papered over. The dispute is settled by negotiations. But it's clear that there's a great deal of tension between the Sadrists and the Al-Hakim faction. I think in hopes of preventing further such clashes, the Shiite coalition, the United Iraqi Alliance, invited the Sadr movement to join it in preparation for the elections to be held in December of 2005 for a permanent parliament. And so the Sadrists were given 30 seats in parliament. They also won 2 seats on their own ticket, so they had 32 seats out of 275. They became a swing vote, and they, as part of their reason for agreeing to join, demanded that a timetable be set for U.S. withdrawal and that Iraq not recognize the State of Israel. Again, in the December 2005 elections, the Shiite bloc dominated parliament. And as the new parliament was struggling to form a government, disaster struck. The Sunni Arab guerrilla movement had been attempting to destabilize Iraq by provoking sectarian conflict. So they would blow up Shiite markets, weddings, funerals, and in hopes that the Shiites would then attack Sunnis. The Sunni Arab guerrilla movement had failed to produce mass sectarian violence, however, until February of 2006, when it blew up a very sacred Shiite shrine in the city of Samarra. Shiites believe that there were 12 successors to the Prophet Muhammad, The 12th, Muhammad al-Mahdi, they believe, disappeared into a supernatural realm from which he will one day return. So the Mahdi is a Messiah figure, analogous for Shiites to the expectation among Christians of the return of Christ. And Muqtada Sadr's movement believes that the coming of the Mahdi is soon, is very near. That's why he called his militia the Mahdi Army. The shrine in Samarra that was blown up is especially associated with the Imam Mahdi, the promised one of Shiites. So the Shiites who were especially attached to the shrine of the Mahdi reacted with violence against Sunnis. There were crowds in the street. Sunni mosques were burned down. Sunnis were shot down. Hundreds died, and the Mahdi army turned to death squad activity. It would kill Sunnis at night. You would find 30, 40, 50 bodies in the morning. Many Shiites blamed the Americans for the bombing, for at least not preventing the bombing, and also for interfering with the deployment of Shiite militias that might have protected the shrine and protected Shiite lives. Within Parliament, in the aftermath of the violence, the Sadrists played a key role in bringing to power a new prime minister, Nouri al-Maliki, who was elected with support from his own Dawa party and from the Sadrists. As a result, al-Maliki declined to condemn the Mahdi army for its death squad activities, and whenever the American forces attempted to curb the Mahdi army, al-Maliki would side with the Mahdi army of Muqtada Sadr. The Americans faced this roadblock of Maliki's support for the Sadr movement and its support for him. And so in February of this year, in 2007, they began a new strategy of increasing the number of U.S. troops in Iraq and attempting to clear Baghdad neighborhoods of Sunni Arab guerrillas and of Shiite militiamen like the Mahdi army. Muqtada Sadr, for some months this spring, went into hiding. Apparently he feared that the Americans might again attempt to arrest him. And the Americans, at the same time, put enormous pressure on the al-Maliki government to distance itself from al-Sadr. So very recently, al-Maliki condemned the Mahdi army. He said that some units of it had been infiltrated and taken over by Ba'athist thugs, by rogue elements, and the Sadrists were very angry at being called Ba'athis, because for them there is no dirtier word than a Ba'athist. So the Americans are working with Iraqis in the parliament to create a new bloc that would support al-Maliki. This would be the Dawa party, the Supreme Council, the two Shiite parties, then the Kurds, and then at least one of the Sunni fundamentalist parties. So the whole question of al-Maliki's alliance with the Sadrs is now murky, and it appears to be that al-Maliki may break with the Sadrs. The question is, if the Iraqi government is perceived by the Sadr movement now to be against them, might that not cause a resurgence of turmoil? So let me conclude by attempting some analysis of this phenomenon. I would argue that these events unfolded as they did because the Americans imagined that they could rule Iraq through some big politicians, especially expatriates, that they brought with them when they conquered the country. In fact, social and political movements that comprised millions of people had already mobilized in Iraq to assert their own political will. You know, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, the President and Vice President of the United States, are millionaires. And I think they could not imagine that poor Shiites in the slums of Baghdad could derail their project. So the poor Shiites of the south, of whom there are millions, rallied politically behind Muqtada Sadr as the successor of his revered father, Sadiq Sadr. The Americans didn't even know these people existed. The Sadr movement, on the other hand, has also faced challenges. First of all, poor people in the slums are difficult to organize on a disciplined basis, and so their politics has not been consistent. Also, Muqtada Sadr himself was very young when he began his agitation in 2003. He was inexperienced. He had been in hiding from Saddam. And so he made many political errors because of his inexperience. He has also failed to overcome a key contradiction in his own political stance. And he says he is an Iraqi nationalist who wants to preserve the unity of Iraq and who wants to reach out and have good relations with the Sunni Arabs. On the other hand, he has depended heavily on Shiite militiamen, many of whom engage in death squad activities, killing Sunnis for sectarian revenge. He gained a great deal of political power through his alliance with al-Maliki, but it is not clear that he is going to be able to retain that alliance. Despite these contradictions, despite his failures, Muqtada Sadr continues to lead a movement that encompasses millions of Shiite Iraqis, which has a great deal of political power, and the Americans have not been able to defeat his movement. It seems increasingly clear that the Americans will leave Iraq for the most part during the next 2 years. And the question is, can Muqtada Sadr continue to keep his organization vital and position himself very possibly to take over Iraq when they leave? Thank you very much.
ご清聴ありがとうございました。